Siddhant, are we on?
Yes, we are.
All set?
Yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We are going to give it another minute for any last minute folks who are just coming into the waiting room now. So one more minute and we'll get started.
Thank you.
All right, we should get moving. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the International Alliance of App-Based Transport Workers webinar on the ILO Blue Report on platform standards. We've built this as an open consultation and open discussion. We're glad to see so many of us here from different parts of the world. We have a range of folks from all of our affiliates who've just joined. We have a whole range of labor activists, trade union folks from across the world here, a few government officials I can see. So glad that all of you are here. Wonderful, and we'll get going in a minute. The entire ILC process, the double discussion format for the setting up of a new convention, a binding convention and recommendations on platform standards is a process that started several years ago. We had our first discussion last year, followed by the publication of the Brown Report, and then now the Blue Report that has just come out a few weeks ago. We are headed into the second discussion in June 2026 in Geneva for the and we know that it's going to be a difficult and long negotiation that we have no idea where we're going to land, what the outcomes of that process is going to be. But the IAATW has been in regular consultation with all of its affiliates, and we feel that the process leading us up to here and going forward is a process that we have not only engaged it over the last one and a half years, but we continue to engage, and this is part of that process of engagement. We have 4 speakers lined up here today to open us up to a discussion. We hope that the discussion is going to be the most productive part of this, along with the comments from the speakers. We have Sheikh Salahuddin, the National General Secretary of the Indian Federation of App-Based Transport Workers, IFAT. IFAT is now officially, I presume, 6 or 7 years old, and it is active across 12 Indian states and has been responsible for multiple legislations on the platform economy, especially in the transport sector. We have Jeff Watt, who is a co-founder of ILO and a labor activist that we recognize for his long service and role in the arena of international labor work, including at the ILO itself. We have Pat Horn, who is with Vigo. She is the lead on collective bargaining with Vigo, and has been again a person who's played a historic role in the setting up of StreetNet, Vigo, and a range of organizing efforts that have brought in different workforces into the ILC process. And finally, we have Ashwini Suktankar, who is an advisor with the International Alliance of App-Based Transport Workers, and she has been a figure in the United States who's done a range of work with a whole range of unions, all the way from Unite or into most recently a stint at organizing with SEIU in New York State. So we have 4 speakers. Each of the speakers will speak in 2 rounds of about 4 to 5 minutes each. And once we have those 2 rounds of speeches done, we'll then move to Q&A. The Q&A is going to be structured because we have so many people. It's going to be almost impossible to have people speak. So even as you are listening to the initial engagement from the speakers, please put your questions out in chat. We have somebody, Blake Harwell, who's here, who is volunteered to marshal all those questions and bring 3 questions at a time back to the speakers once we get to the Q&A round. It's really important that everybody who's not speaking stay on mute, because it's going to be otherwise very difficult. So please, if look at your menu, look at your controls on Zoom to make sure you're on mute, and we can then have a meeting that doesn't get interrupted because of all sorts of sounds coming in through other sources. Excellent. Let's get going. I think we are here with and we've had a little bit of trouble with the translation room, so we have set up multiple translation rooms. Those who want to hear this in Spanish, you can go to the globe on interpretation and choose the Spanish.
So the
Go ahead,
the interpreters will be here shortly. The rooms aren't set up yet, so everybody remain on the global channel as of now.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we're having some trouble with the interpretation. And so we're going to start with Sheikh Salahuddin, who's going to speak, and Akriti Bhatia, who is with Paigam Research Collective in New Delhi. She's going to be doing the translation. So we are going to do that translation, at least the first talk from Sheikh Salahuddin in sequence. That is, he's going to speak and Akriti is going to translate. And by then, if we get the interpreters in and the room set up, then we will be able to move forward. All yours, Salahuddin bhai. Pehla sawal, and the question for the first round for everyone is the same, which is, we've all seen the Blue Report. What's your assessment of the Blue Report? How do you see it? In the context of the upcoming ILC in June 2026? Well, how do you think this round, which is aimed at getting to a standard, is going to play out, given your assessment of the Blue Report? Salahuddin bhai, आप पहले बात करेंगे अभी 4 से 5 मिनट, और आपकी ILC की तरफ जो प्रोसेस है उसमें उसकी क्या अनुभव रही है, और उसके साथ में आप ब्लू रिपोर्ट के बारे में जो असेसमेंट है आपका वो भी, लेकिन पहले 4 मिनट में आप ब्लू रिपोर्ट तक पहुंचिएगा. चलिए.
ओके. तमाम गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स का जो दुनिया के अलग अलग कोनों से में थे इस मीटिंग में शामिल हुए, सबका स्वागत है और शुक्रिया. और उन्हीं यूनियन लीडर्स और वर्कर्स रिप्रेजेंटेटिव्स का भी शुक्रिया जो इस कॉल पे है. ये प्लेटफॉर्म आपके है गिग और प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर के बारे में. सिस्टर अश्विनी, आपका भी स्वागत है. नमस्ते, धन्यवाद, आप तीनों इस मीटिंग में आए. ये 2 बातें कहना चाहता हूँ ILC प्रोसेस के बारे में. एक, IFAT के ILC प्रोसेस में क्या भूमिका रही है, और 2, ब्लू रिपोर्ट में जो कन्वेंशन ड्राफ्ट है उसके बारे में हमारा क्या सोच है. ये पहले इंडियन फेडरेशन ऑफ ऐप बेस्ड ट्रांसपोर्ट वर्कर्स से बात करूंगा, क्योंकि मुझे डर है कि हम IFAT जो है वो ILO के प्रोसेस में अच्छा काम नहीं कर पा रही है.
ट्रांसलेशन की जगह दीजिएगा.
Shall I translate?
Okay, translate.
I would like to welcome and thank all the gig and platform workers who have joined this meeting from various corners of the world. My thanks also goes to the union leaders and worker representatives who are on this call. Jeff and Pat, I've heard a great deal about both of you. Sister Ashwini, you are also most welcome. Namaste and thank you to the three of you for attending this meeting. I would like to make 2 points regarding the ILC process. First, what role has IFAT played in the ILC process? And second, what are our views regarding the draft convention presented in the Blue Report? I will begin by speaking on behalf of the IFAT, Indian Federation of App-Based Transport Workers, as I fear that we, IFAT, have not been able to make a meaningful contribution to the ILO processes so far.
Back to Salahuddin. Salahuddin भाई
कंटिन्यू करो। हाँ,
जी
2024 में अपनी एफिलेटेड यूनियंस के साथ बैठकर हमने आईएलओ की 80 पॉइंट क्वेश्चनर का जवाब तैयार किए भेजा था। और लेकिन 2025 में जब आईएलसी हुई तो हमें ऐसा समझ में आया कि क्योंकि हमें बड़े संगठन के सेंट्रल ट्रेड यूनियंस का भाग नहीं है और न ही हम किसी विश्वस्तरीय संगठन जैसे आईटीयूसी का भाग नहीं है, तो इसलिए हमारे इनपुट्स पे कोई विचार नहीं किया जाएगा। ये वह ही प्रकार है कि कहीं शामिल नहीं किया जाएगा। यहाँ मैं आप सबको बताना चाह रहा हूँ, इंडियन फेडरेशन ऑफ ऐप बेस्ड ट्रांसपोर्ट वर्कर्स आईफैट पिछले 10 सालों से प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स को संगठित कर रही है। आकृति जी।
In 2024, after consulting with our affiliated unions, we prepared and submitted our responses to the ILO's 80-point questionnaire. However, in 2025, when the ILC took place, we came to the realization that because we are neither part of any major national central trade union federation or affiliated with a global confederation such as the ITUC, our inputs would not be given due consideration, nor would they be incorporated in any meaningful way. I wish to state here, for the benefit of everyone present, that IFAT has been actively organizing platform workers for the past 10 years. Salahuddin ji. एक बार आप अनम्यूट कर लीजिए प्लीज, एक सेकंड आपका म्यूट हो गया जी।
अब ओके?
Yes, yes, yes.
आईएफएटी जो है 12 ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस है जो भारत के उत्तर से दक्षिण, पूर्व से पश्चिम तक काम करते हैं। हमारे संगठन में टैक्सी सेक्टर और ऐप बेस्ड टैक्सी सेक्टर्स यूनियंस हैं और फूड डिलीवरी वर्कर्स यूनियन भी से है। अर्बन, अभी कुछ महीने पहले अर्बन कंपनी वर्कर्स ने भी हमारे कुछ यूनियन से ज्वाइन करने का काम किया है। तो टैक्सी और फूड डिलीवरी होम सर्विसेज सेक्टर में हम निरंतर बढ़ रहे हैं। और दूसरी बात, भारत में अब तक इस क्षेत्र में जितने भी स्टेट्स लॉज बने हैं प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स के लिए, चाहे वो राजस्थान हो, कर्नाटक हो, जहां झारखंड हो, अभी तेलंगाना, इन सभी के पीछे आईफैट क्या बहुत एकमात्र वर्कर्स ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है और सबसे बड़े वर्कर्स ऑर्गेनाइजेशन है, जिसमें निरंतरन इस प्रोसेस को आगे बढ़ाने का स्टेट में और लास्ट में क्या लॉस होना चाहिए वो बात शामिल करने का काम किया है। कहीं एनजीओस और सिविल सोसाइटीज ग्रुप्स ने हमारा साथ दिया है इस संघर्ष में, लेकिन वर्कर्स ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस की बात करी जाए तो आईफैट एकमात्र सबसे बड़ा संगठन रहा है जिसमें स्टेट्स में लॉज बनाने में और लागू करने का काम किया है। और पिछले 3 वर्षों में निरंतर हम केंद्र सरकार से राष्ट्र में कंसल्टेंट काम लगातार शामिल रहे हैं। तो हमारा सवाल है कि
हाँ, यहाँ तक एक बार आप रोकिए, मैं इतना बोलती हूँ फिर आप आगे बढ़ना प्लीज। So IFAT comprises 12 constituent organizations that operate across the length and breadth of India from north to south and from east to west. Our affiliated bodies include union representing the traditional taxi sector, the app-based taxi sector, food delivery workers, and just a few months ago, workers from urban company have also begun to join our unions. Thus, we are witnessing continuous growth across the taxi, food delivery, and home services sector. Secondly, regarding the legislative landscape in India, we note that all the state level laws enacted thus far for platform workers, be it in Rajasthan, Karnataka, Jharkhand, and more recently Telangana, behind all these efforts, IFAT stands as the sole and indeed the largest workers' organization that has consistently worked to drive this process forward and to ensure that the necessary provisions are incorporated into state level legislations. While numerous NGOs and civil society groups have supported us in this struggle, when it comes specifically to workers' organizations, IFAT has remained the single largest entity dedicated to the task of formulating and implementing laws within the states. Furthermore, for the past 3 years, we've continuously engaged in consultations with the central government at the national level.
Okay.
Salahuddin.
जी आईफैट जो है प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स का भारत में सबसे बड़ा संगठन है और अगर हम भारत में प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स के लिए कानून बनाने में शामिल हो सकते हैं, एक अहम भूमिका रोल निभा सकते हैं, तो जब आईएलओ के स्तर पे प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स के लिए कोई कन्वेंशन बन रही है, उसमें हमारी बात और हमारे से मतलब है जो ग्रॉस रूट पे लेवल पे वर्कर्स हैं, उनकी आवाज को क्यों नहीं शामिल किया जा रहा, हमें कंसल्टेड प्रोसेस में क्यों इन्वॉल्व नहीं किया जा रहा है, ये तमाम बातें मुझे नाराज भी करती हैं और दुखी भी। और मैं देखता हूँ एक बहुत बड़ा डिस्कनेक्ट है हमारे देश के मेन स्ट्रीम सेंट्रल ट्रेड यूनियंस और हमें जो ग्रॉस रूट लेवल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस है, किसी से भी नहीं जुड़ी नहीं है। और इसी प्रकार से अंतर्राष्ट्रीय पर भी बड़े बड़े संगठन जैसे ITUC और जो जमीन से जुड़े हुए संगठनों की आवाज है, कहीं इनमें बहुत बड़ा एक डिस्कनेक्ट है और यही डिस्कनेक्ट में ब्लू रिपोर्ट में भी मैं देखता हूँ। हमें इसके लिए कोई हल निकालना पड़ेगा। थैंक यू।
So our question therefore is this: IFAT is the largest organization representing platform workers in India, and if we are capable of participating in and playing a pivotal role in the formation of laws for platform workers within India, then why our voices, and by our I refer to the voices of the grassroots level workers who are deeply rooted in reality, not being included in the consultations regarding the ILO convention currently being drafted for platform workers? Why are we not being involved in this consultation process? These issues leave me feeling both angry and deeply saddened. I perceive a significant disconnect between our country's mainstream central trade unions and organizations like ours, grassroots level bodies that operate independently. Similarly, at the international level, there exists a profound disconnect between major organizations like the ITUC and the voices of organizations grounded in grassroots realities. I observe this very same disconnect reflected in the Blue Report, and it is imperative that we find a solution to this issue. Thank
Okay.
you very much. Yeah.
I presume that is what Salahuddin has for the first round. On to Jeff. Jeff, are you here?
I am here.
Wonderful.
Yeah,
Glad you're here. Over to you.
yeah, thank you, Bijou, for the invitation to this convening. I really appreciate it and the opportunity to talk with everybody here and kind of reflect on last year and the what we have ahead of us this June. So on the Blue Report, how is the ILO progressing on the path towards a binding convention? Uh, you know, I would say, I think as we all are, disappointed, very disappointed with the direction the ILO has taken in the Blue Report. particularly in light of the substantial number of submissions from unions, including some that are on this call, and indeed some governments, indicating that the prior draft not only needed to be protected, but in fact strengthened. And instead, we get a substantially reduced draft. So I think, as many of you know who are following this last year or heard afterwards, the employer strategy was to run out the clock through endless debate over amendments that had no support in the room, right? And unfortunately, we had a chair who was not able to steer the room and allowed days to go by without moving forward on definitions, on scope, on basic parts of the convention. So this left us at the end of last June with a large majority of the convention and the entire recommendation to negotiate this year. So, in order for there to be time to discuss both, I think the ILO, and here's where I can give them some understanding, shortened them both, in the hope that there would be sufficient time for us to fully negotiate both instruments and adopt them, right? But in doing so, I think they can cut the convention to the bone, right? Shifted important rights that should be in a convention to the recommendation. And I think in some cases made a number of errors in drafting, which I think the team was trying to accommodate a number of conflicting interests in a way that was really impossible to do. And I think this text also reflects what I assume to have been significant political pushback from the employers after the fact, and some governments in pushing on the office. And I think we know which governments we're talking about, but I think it was pretty clear. So I think this year the workers have a very large hill to climb. We're going to have to introduce several substantive amendments to the text, or try to move text that was put into the recommendation back into the convention, right? So at this moment, I'm not going to have time to go into each and every concern, and I think we'll have some opportunity to talk about some of those concerns with the text. But aside from the text on automated systems and data and privacy, which is kind of new territory for the ILO, much of what is left over essentially restates kind of well-worn principles and doesn't really elaborate on them in a way that applies to the specificities of digital platform work and the reality, as previous speakers talking about, actually reflect the realities of how this plays out on the ground for workers, and provides more specific and targeted protection to address those issues, whether it's around occupational safety and health, or specific issues on freedom of association or collective bargaining, right? So, just to quickly flag a few points. I mean, obviously, the OSH protections that are in the convention are quite generic and weak. Some language was pushed to the recommendation, but again, I think, especially given that we know how hazardous this work can be, and how the automated systems themselves are drivers of those harms, that it is not elaborated in the convention's the problem. The convention completely eliminated issues around working time that got pushed to the recommendation, which is, again, an issue we all know is a core and critical issue. The payment and remuneration text contains, I think, several important flaws, including still opening up the possibility for payment in kind, which I can't believe in 2026 we're still talking about. right? Terms and conditions of employment text has major loopholes about the choice of law, the misclassification language, I think is too passive, and we can go on and on. But I would just say, I think we have a lot of work ahead of us. So, and even where some of this protective language has been moved to the recommendation, this assumes that we're going to get to the recommendation, get it adopted as is or better. If we were going to have a more comprehensive and rights protective package. And that's a big question. So that's why I think I'm glad we're having this call, and why it's really important for all of us to coordinate, figure out what, given that we're going to have a window of less than 2 weeks, how do we prioritize the amendments that we're really going to fight for, that are going to have the most impact, and then between now and June, do the advocacy necessary to turn the ship around in June. So those are kind of my initial comments on the text. So look
Thank
forward
you
to
so much,
hearing
Jeff.
the others. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Those were very sharp and precise comments there in terms of what lies ahead for us, and some of the weaknesses that have gotten baked into the draft convention, and the kind of timeframes we're operating with in terms of trying to change the course. Thank you so much. Over to yet another person who brings to us a wealth of experience in negotiating and dealing with the ILC process. Pat Horn, are you here?
Yes, I am.
Wonderful. So good to hear your voice, Pat, and over to you.
Thanks, Biju, and thank you very much for the invitation. I also really appreciate the opportunity for us to start exchanging viewpoints about the work that we have to do before June 2026. I'm also pretty much in agreement with the last two speakers, that we're pretty disappointed with what we have seen in the blue paper. When I took a look at it, the first thing that I noticed was that we still have a really nice clause, which says, Article 1B, which says that digital platform worker is defined as a person employed or engaged to work for the provision of services organized and or facilitated by a digital labor platform for remuneration or payment. And then it says, regardless of their classification of status and employment. And we've been really concerned about this because we've noticed the attempts to cut out self-employed or own account workers. So that clause looks like it covers us. But what we've noticed is that there are lots of escape clauses in the blue paper for governments and for the employers who control digital platforms. And some of them are in the weak clauses that Jeff has talked about, covering OSH and remuneration. The question on misclassification talks about, to the extent, let's have a look. Article 8, each member shall take measures to collect classification of digital platforms in respect of the existence of an employment relationship, which means that it doesn't really cover those misclassified own account platform workers. So, and in fact, what we've noticed is that unlike Convention 177 that was passed for home workers in 1995, which totally excluded own account workers, this one doesn't totally exclude own account or self-employed workers, but instead it relates them to a second-class status in comparison to those digital workers who have an employment relationship. So we've got a big job ahead of us to ensure that that clause 1, which talks about irrespective of employment relationship, is actually honored in all the other clauses in the instrument. There's also been a concern that we've picked up in statements coming from IAATW about nothing in the draft dealing with the thing which we know happens in the sector, which is that as the technology changes all the time, the algorithms and the platforms are constantly evolving and adjusting themselves to basically escape the responsibilities that they have in controlling digital platforms to provide decent work conditions for the digital platform workers whose work they are exploiting, whether they have an employment relationship or whether they are self-employed. And our concern is in WeGo, as we looked at this, that these kinds of effects, the question of relegating self-employed workers to a second-class status, and the one of not anticipating the impact on the ability to evade responsibilities by evolving technology, which is something we can anticipate even if we haven't already seen what those things are. It's maybe a new challenge that we have in this kind of an instrument. But these kinds of effects are also likely to impact disproportionately on digital platform workers in the global south. So let me leave it there for now. I've got plenty of other things to say under the next round, but these are the first main concerns that we have when we look at the way going forward, being totally in agreement with what the other two speakers have already said.
Thank you so much, Pat. That was very, very precise, and I think you just picked out the specific ways in which a whole range, a majority of the workers, a vast majority of the workers, could be reduced to second-class status, as you called it, because we know that very few app workers will, if at all, will get covered right now with as are classified right now as employees, and there is seemingly no presumption of employment status that's baked into this draft at all. In any case, we'll hear a little more about that probably from Ashwini, who has been one of the people who's been really talking about the question of presumption of employment. Ashwini, over to you.
I'll probably get into the issue of presumption of employment in round two, Biju. On this round, I mean, I can't find any way of disagreeing with the folks who came before. I wanted to spend a second, though, to think about the aspirations that we as workers' movements went in with into this process, because in thinking about the question of where the Blue Report lands us, I think we're all on the same page that none of us is interested in just the idea of a convention at any cost. So the process of trying to develop new standards began with visionary unionists and progressive governments who were looking at the massive expansion of platform work. And understood that there was no international debate, let alone an international consensus on how to regulate platform work. It meant that there was an urgent need for the ILO to figure out how to make principles of decent work real for platform workers. And that was those were the massive gaps. There had been as Sheikh Salahuddin and others have mentioned, national and local experiments in regulation, but without any kind of anchoring in an international consensus, it was very easy for big platform enterprises to escape that regulation, either by buying their way out through the payment of fines or just by refusing to operate in a jurisdiction. They could just opt out. So the support for a standard from grassroots organizations like IFAT and others, like folks who've been trying to organize workers in this sector for a decade or more, came because it was seen as a way of empowering and incentivizing states to regulate. So grassroots unions hoped that a new standard would give states guidance on how to protect workers when they're being managed by AI rather than by a human. How do you raise questions of discrimination when your boss is not a human? And those groups were also eager that a standard would push their governments to make companies pay into social security schemes, which in many, if not most, states are already dangerously underfunded. Health, pensions, unemployment insurance. So from that perspective, even though from what I can see, the Blue Report suggests a kind of death march to a new standard. As it's drafted, it doesn't seem able to do what grassroots groups want. I mean, with the kinds of shifts in the global political mood that we're all seeing, it seems that platform enterprises smelt an opportunity and seized it. As Pat mentioned, as Jeff mentioned, they saw an opportunity to whittle down who the standards would apply to, both at the level of workers and enterprises, and tried to ensure that it would be as few as possible. They saw a chance to strip out the detail and the specificity around the obstacles that platform workers face in trying to build their unions or challenging discrimination. And sorry, I'm just trying to fight off a cat who's trying to climb onto my lap. So the hope of workers was for a convention that strengthened the hand of government to impose costs on enterprises. Instead, what I think we risk seeing is massive subsidies from states to big business, that states are being asked either to fund or to ignore traditional employer obligations rather than being able to extract those from platform enterprises. And from that perspective alone, that would be a step back, not a step forward. So the current posture of enterprises and right-wing governments is not surprising. We're seeing massive attacks on every possible global institution from the right. I guess the question that I have for all of us is, how can we as workers' organizations not succumb to a sense of, inevitable doom, but start articulating alternatives? Okay, Biju, back to you.
Thank you so much, Ashwini. That brings us to the end of the first round of engagement and input from all the four speakers. I'm going to turn this back to Brother Salahuddin with a very, very simple question. Brother Salahuddin, what do you see as, the demand, or what would you see as the aspirations of the workers at the base of IFAT? Some of their affiliates, what are they saying? What are the kind of aspirations in terms of what they'd like to see in a convention that's not reflected in the Blue Report as things stand? Let's go back to Brother Salahuddin. Salahuddin bhai, आपके दूसरे हिस्से में जो ये जो आपके affiliates, आपके जो base है, workers है, उनसे क्या सुन रहे हैं कि ये convention में क्या होना चाहिए, and जो Blue Report में शामिल दिख रहा है या नहीं दिख रहा है आपको, इसके बारे में आपकी क्या राय है?
ओके, मुझे ILO कैसे काम करता है ये समझने में कुछ साल लग गए। इसे समझने का एक तरीका ये था कि मैं खुद से सीधा सवाल पूछता रहा। जिन वर्कर्स को मैं रिप्रेजेंट करता हूँ, ओला, उबर, टैक्सी ड्राइवर्स और स्विगी, जोमेटो डिलीवरी बॉय वर्कर्स के, और वो सभी IFAT के क्या चाहते हैं? बेहतर वेजेस के लिए लड़े। वो चाहते हैं कि IFAT के साथ डीएक्टिवेशन को रोकें। चाहते हैं कि यूनियन को मान्यता मिले और कलेक्टिव बार्गेनिंग का अधिकार मिले। वो चाहते हैं कि तो कोई ड्राइवर काम पे मर जाए या घायल हो जाए तो उसे सही मुआवजा मिले। वो चाहते हैं कि किसी ड्राइवर को हार्ट अटैक हो जाए या कोई बड़ी हेल्थ इमरजेंसी आ जाए तो कंपनी उसके देखभाल करे। वो चाहते हैं कि अगर किसी जॉब से पैसों को लेके कोई विवाद हो तो भी उसे सुलझाने का एक सॉफ्ट और इंसाफ वाला तरीका तय किया जाए। बस यही सारी चीजें हैं जो एक वर्कर चाहता है।
So it took me a few years to understand how the ILO operates. And one way I came to grasp it was by constantly asking myself a straightforward question: what exactly do the workers I represent, whether they are Ola and Uber taxi drivers or Swiggy and Zomato delivery person, what do they all want from IFAT? They want IFAT to fight for better wages. They want IFAT to put a stop to arbitrary account deactivations. They want their union to be recognized and granted the right to collective bargaining. They want to ensure that if a driver dies or sustains an injury while on duty, they receive adequate compensation. They want the company to provide care and support should a driver suffer a heart attack or face any major medical emergency. And they want a clear, fair, and just mechanism established to resolve any disputes regarding earnings from a specific job. These are quite simply the only things a worker truly desires. Salahuddin.
ओके, तो मेरा सवाल ये है, ब्लू रिपोर्ट या उसमें जो कन्वेंशन का ड्राफ्ट है उसमें इन सब बातों के बारे में क्या कहा गया है? चलिए एक एक करके देखते हैं। पहली बात ये लेते हैं, वेजेस, मेरी कमाई। मैं 12, 13, 14 घंटे काम करता हूँ तो दिन के आखिर में जब मैं घर जाता हूँ मेरे पास इतने पैसे होने चाहिए कि परिवार को खाना मिले, घर का किराया दे सकूं, बच्चों को स्कूल जा सके और शायद छुट्टियों में मैं उनके कहीं घुमाने भी ले जा सकूं। क्या ये बहुत बड़ी मांग है? आकृति जी।
So my question is this: what does the Blue Report or the draft convention contained within it have to say about all these matters? Let's examine them one by one. Let's start with the first point: wages. Specifically, my earnings. I work for 12, 13, or even 14 hours a day. Therefore, when I head home at the end of the day, I should have enough money in hand to put food on my family's table, pay the rent, send my children to school, and perhaps even take them on a vacation during the holidays. Is that really too much to ask? Salahuddin ji?
ओके, आवाज सुने आ रही ना आकृति जी मेरी?
हाँ, बिल्कुल clear.
ओके, राइट, थैंक यू। ब्लू रिपोर्ट कहती है कि अगर प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स कंपनी का कर्मचारी है तो उसे राष्ट्रीय न्यूनतम मिलना चाहिए, लेकिन हमें तो कंपनी और सरकार कर्मचारी मानती नहीं, तो फिर हमारा क्या होगा? तो हम सिर्फ ये ब्लू रिपोर्ट में चाहते हैं कि प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स कर्मचारी नहीं हैं, ये साबित करना कंपनी की जिम्मेदारी है। और जब तक कंपनी ये साबित नहीं कर पाती, जब तक उस वर्कर को कर्मचारी माना जाएगा। अगर जब हम कर्मचारी नहीं हैं तो हमें सब कहते हैं हम इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट है। तो इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्टर के बारे में ब्लू रिपोर्ट क्या कहती है? सिर्फ इतना कहती है कि इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्टर्स को पैसे नेशनल करेंसी में दिया जाए और समय पे दिया जाए। वो क्या बात है, लेकिन हमें देश में तो पहले से भी तो कॉमन लॉ में ये बात है, इसके लिए आईएलओ कन्वेंशन की क्या जरूरत है? आकृति जी।
The Blue Report states that if a platform worker is classified as an employee of the company, they are entitled to receive the national minimum wage. However, neither the company nor the government currently recognizes us as employees. So, what becomes of us then? All we ask is for the Blue Report to explicitly state that the onus lies with the company to prove that a platform worker is not an employee. And until the company successfully proves otherwise, that worker must be treated as an employee. Now, if we are not considered employees, everyone tells us that we are independent contractors. So, what does the Blue Report have to say regarding this quote unquote independent contractor? It merely states that independent contractors should be paid in the national currency and that these payments should be made on time. Wow, what a groundbreaking revelation. However, in our country, this principle is already enshrined in common law. So, what is the need for an ILO convention on this? Salahuddin ji?
हम प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर कन्वेंशन ऐसी चाहते हैं, इसमें इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट को भी आमदनी का संरक्षण दिया जाए। तो ये कैसे हो सकता है? ये ऐसे हो सकता है कि कन्वेंशन सरकारों पे ये बात करते हैं कि कोई भी प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर जो भी सर्विस देता है, उसके इवर्स में उसकी जो कमाई होती है, उस रकम का 85 to -90% का जो वर्कर को मिलना चाहिए। बचा हुआ 15% या 20% एग्रीगेटर्स रख सकता है। तो इस प्रकार से एक मिनिमम अर्निंग जो कॉस्ट ऑफ लिविंग पर बेस होती है, वो तय हो सकती है। ईशा जी, आखिरी।
So, we as platform workers seek a convention that extends income protection even to independent contractors. How might this be achieved? It could be accomplished by making it binding upon governments through the convention that for any service rendered by a platform worker, 85 to 90% of the resulting earnings must accrue to the worker, while the remaining 15 to 20% may be retained by the aggregator. In this manner, a minimum earning threshold pegged to the cost of living could be established.
हम चाहेंगे कि इस प्रकार का प्रोटेक्शन जो है, उस बोर्ड के माध्यम से ये रेशो तय कर लिया जाए, जो इंश्योर करे जाए कि 80 - 90 जो सर्विस का भुगतान है, सर्विस की जो कमाई है, जो वर्कर्स के पास रहे, जो संरक्षित रहे। इसमें जो है हर प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स कवर हो, चाहे इसमें इस रेशियो से, इस लिविंग स्टैंडर्ड से बोर्ड के माध्यम से, चाहे वो कैब ड्राइवर हो, चाहे वो फूड डिलीवरी राइडर हो, चाहे वो होम सर्विसेज वर्कर हो। तो हम बस इतना चाहेंगे कि ये लिविंग स्टैंडर्ड्स बोर्ड जो है, जो हर 2 साल में सभी मानदंडों को ध्यान में रखते हुए, जैसे कि उद्योग का वेतन, श्रमिकों की आपूर्ति, सड़कों पे सरकार आदि और समी इस रेशियो की समीक्षा करी जाए। आकृति जी।
We would like to see this form of protection implemented, specifically that this revenue sharing ratio be determined through a designated board to ensure that 80 to 90% of the payment for the service or the earnings generated by it remains with the workers and is safeguarded. Furthermore, every platform worker should be covered under this framework, whether through this specific ratio or via the aforementioned Living Standards Board, regardless of whether they are a cab driver, a food delivery rider, or a home service provider. That is our sole request. Moreover, this Living Standards Board should conduct a review every 2 years, taking into account various parameters such as industry wage levels, the supply of labor, the volume of vehicles on the roads, and so forth, to reevaluate and adjust this ratio.
तो इस
Salahuddin
तरीके
bhai.
का कुछ एक चीज इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट प्रोटेक्शन के रूप में होनी चाहिए। तो देखा जाए तो हम 2 चीजें चाहते हैं। एक किया कि प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स को एक एम्प्लॉय का स्टेटस दीजिए, और अगर आप इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्ट मानते हैं, तो उन्हें उनकी आमदनी का और काम का संरक्षण दें। जब हम काम के संरक्षण की बात करते हैं, तो ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि कोई वर्कर पूरे दिन में उसको एक ही जॉब मिले तो वो क्या कमाएगा। तो ये सब बातें भी ध्यान में रखी जाए, क्योंकि वर्कर्स की संख्या तो ज़्यादा हो रही है। सब जो है वो ज़्यादातर उसी एक सवारी को ढूंढने में लगे हुए हैं। तो कहाँ से उन्हें इंसाफ मिलेगा? कहाँ से उनके काम मिलेगा? तो ये लिविंग स्टैंडर्ड्स बोर्ड जो है, जो इन चीज़ों पे भी ध्यान रखे और अपनी ज़हन में ये भी तय करे कि कारों की संख्या, कितने वर्कर्स को उसको उद्योग सेक्टर में काम करना चाहिए, उनकी संख्या क्या है। इस आधार पे हर वर्कर को कितने जॉब्स मिलेंगे, ये तमाम बातों का रिव्यू जो है वो समय समय पे जो है सबके लिए, हर प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर के लिए एक ही फॉर्मूला अपनाया जाए। आकृति।
In essence, some such mechanism ought to be established to serve as a form of protection for independent contractors. Viewed broadly, our demands boil down to two key points. First, that platform workers be accorded the status of employees, and second, should they continue to be classified as independent contractors, that they be provided with protection regarding both their income and their work opportunities. When we speak of protecting work opportunities, we are addressing the critical issue that if a worker receives only a single assignment throughout an entire day, how can they possibly earn a livelihood? All these factors must be taken into consideration, particularly given the rapidly growing number of workers in this sector, most of whom are simultaneously competing to secure that very same ride or assignment. Under such circumstances, where are they to find justice? Where are they to find work? Therefore, the Living Standards Board should take these matters into consideration and establish as a guiding principle that factors such as the number of vehicles and the requisite workforce within this industry sector, specifically determining the number of workers based on the job opportunities available to each individual, should be subject to a periodic review. Furthermore, a single uniform formula should be adopted for everyone, specifically for every platform worker.
सलाउद्दीन भाई, अगला जो पॉइंट एक बना के पूरा एक साथ खत्म करके आकृति को बोलना, अदरवाइज वी रन आउट ऑफ टाइम।
ओके बीजू भाई। अब ये ब्लू रिपोर्ट ये भी कहती है कि डीएक्टिवेशन या किसी इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्टर या प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स के खिलाफ कोई भी कार्रवाई डिस्क्रिमिनेटेड नहीं होनी चाहिए। तो इसमें भी नई बात क्या है? ये तो हमारे कानून में भी लिखा हुआ है। जो भी ये कानून है वो किसी के भी प्रति डिस्क्रिमिनेट नहीं हो, ना कि उसके धर्म की प्रति, ना उसके जेंडर के प्रति, ना किसी भी तरीके से डिस्क्रिमिनेट नहीं हो। तो ILO कन्वेंशन इसमें क्या नई बात कह रही है? तो हम जो चाहते हैं कि डीएक्टिवेशन के अगर बात करें, तो जो हम चाहते हैं कि ब्लू रिपोर्ट में वो जिसका उल्लेख ब्लू रिपोर्ट में कहीं पे नहीं है, हम ये चाहते हैं कि ब्लू रिपोर्ट उसके अधीन जो है कन्वेंशन का ड्राफ्ट बन रहा है, उसमें जस्ट कॉज फॉर ड्यू प्रोसेस का फ्रेमवर्क हो, है ना? कि कंपनी जो मजबूर करे कि वर्कर्स को ऐप से हटाने से पहले उसे नोटिस दिया जाए, चाहे वो कोई भी वर्कर हो। अगर कोई भी वर्कर ऐप से हटाया जाए तो उसे नोटिस मिलना चाहिए, उसी से भी सबूत भी मिलना चाहिए, अपनी बात को कहने का पूरी अधिकार मिलना चाहिए। कस्टमर्स के क्या एलिगेशंस है वो सच है नहीं है, इन तमाम बातों का भी जो है एक मैनुअल रिव्यू भी होना चाहिए। हम चाहते हैं कि ये तमाम बातें ब्लू रिपोर्ट में होनी चाहिए, लेकिन वास्तविकता ये है कि वो ब्लू रिपोर्ट में नहीं है। 4 ड्राफ्ट बन चुके हैं ILO के कन्वेंशन के। तो हमें ये जानना चाहते हैं कि हमारी जो दुनिया है 99% जो वर्कर्स है, जो है इंडिपेंडेंट कॉन्ट्रैक्टर्स है, तो उन्हें इन सभी बातों का कुछ भी नहीं मिल रहा है। वो सब तो यही पूछ रहे हैं कि ILO कन्वेंशन बन रही है, लेकिन इसमें कुछ भी तो ऐसा नहीं है जो हमारे मतलब का हो। ना हमसे कोई पूछता है, ना हमसे कोई बात करता है, न तो मैं यही रुकना चाहता हूँ।
चलो आकृति, all yours, and we got to move. We're running out of time.
Okay, I'll quickly just now. The Blue Report also stipulates that neither deactivation nor punitive action taken against an independent contractor or platform worker should be discriminatory in nature. So, what exactly is new about this? After all, our own laws already enshrine the principle that no legislation should be discriminatory towards any individual, neither on the grounds of religion, gender, or any other manner whatsoever. In light of this, what novel contribution does ILO Convention actually offer? So, if we turn our attention to the issue of deactivation, what we desire regarding the Blue Report, and a point that is conspicuously absent from it, is the inclusion of a framework for just cause and due process within the report itself, and the draft convention being formulated under its aegis. This framework should serve to compel companies to issue a formal notice to a worker before removing them from the app. regardless of who the worker is. If any worker is to be removed from the platform, they must receive a notice, be provided with the evidence against them, and be granted a full and fair opportunity to present their side of the story. Furthermore, the allegations leveled by customers, whether true or false, must be subjected to a thorough manual review process. While we advocate for the inclusion of all these provisions within the Blue Report, the reality is that they are currently absent from it. 4 drafts of the ILO Convention have already been produced. Consequently, we seek to understand in our specific reality, where 99% of the workforce consists of these independent contractors, why are these workers receiving absolutely none of these protections? The prevailing sentiment among them is an ILO convention is being drafted, yet it contains nothing of relevance or benefit to us. Moreover, no one consults us and no one engages in dialogue with us. I would like to conclude my remarks at this juncture. I could expound upon a multitude of other issues such as occupational health, safety, algorithmic control, collective bargaining, but this time is of the essence. Therefore, in closing, I would simply state this: either the convention should by default accord us the status of employees, or if we are to remain classified as independent contractors, it must at the very least ensure the establishment of standards board, robust mechanism for just cause due process, and safeguards for the protection of our income. These fundamental provisions at the very minimum must be guaranteed.
Thank you, Akriti. And very quickly to move this along, let's go to Jeff. Jeff, Sheikh Salahuddin brings up the whole question of classification, and I want you to focus specifically on the question of independent contractors and what protections it offers, the Blue Report draft offers to independent contractors.
Yeah, thank
Over
you.
to Jeff.
Thank you. And just to say, I share Saladin's far more than disappointment with the text, and I think for many of the issues that you raised, the workers group last year prepared hundreds of amendments to the previous text, which was in fact stronger on many of the issues that you're talking about, right? On a living wage, regardless of whether you're an employee or not. Issues around review of automated decisions in such a way that you have a legitimate, you have information on the basis on which that decision was made, and you have a legitimate process to review that decision, including reviewing that in a tribunal where necessary, right? So I think many of the points you raised, and I think your final point, basically saying much of what is in this text restates basic principles of what we already have, both at the international level and the national level. So I can only agree with what you said. I think there's this text as it is disappointing, doesn't move us forward in many respects, and we'll need substantial amendments in June in order to make it to really address the issues that you're talking about. So just so on the issue of employment status, right? I think what we were trying to accomplish last year and what we'll try to accomplish again this year is that this instrument should extend rights and protections to everyone who is a digital platform worker, regardless of your employment status, right? And the definition, says that, but the issue, some of the issues that were brought up last year, for example, from the European Union, they were like, well, okay, on occupational safety and health, right? Like, I can see in some cases, platform worker, the OSH issues would really need to be covered by the platform, but others maybe someone else has more responsibility for the directly for the occupational safety and health issues, especially if you're doing online, task work, right? So, because remember, we're also talking about workers who are doing geolocated work, right? And those who are doing online work, right? So, and trying to come up with something that covers everybody, regardless of their occupation, sector, or the kind of the what kind of digital platform you're using, whether it's again like you're doing the transportation, delivery, or even doing like on-site domestic work or others, or whether you're doing kind of the cloud or crowd-based work. Right? So, but again, going back to what has been said by Saladin and what Pat had also said in the previous round of comments, this is intended to cover all workers regardless of status, but recognizing that a lot of legal systems still make some distinctions based on whether you're an employee or not. And we know in many, many cases on digital labor platforms that workers are classified in a contract as independent contractors when it is clear that the elements of an employment relationship are all there, right? So that's why there was language saying we need governments to combat misclassification, but regardless of which side of that line you fall on, these rights apply to you, right? So the language that is in the Blue Report now on misclassification, like I mentioned in my previous comments, I think are too passive, right? I mean, this is the major issue on digital labor platforms, and it needs to be in an active, proactive, aggressive efforts by states or governments to ensure upfront that workers are properly classified instead of putting the burden on the back end to say, oh, well, okay, workers are going to have to then go to court and spend years claiming that they have been misclassified, right? So that is key, right? I think some of the problems that the Blue Report also does is that they do have language saying, well, depending on national law and based on employment status, on things that we were obviously hoping for more. I mean, what is clear from this text and what helps address some of the issues that have been raised is that it is recognized that freedom of association, collective bargaining, the fundamentals, discrimination, forced labor, child labor, and occupational safety and health are fundamental labor rights, and that they apply regardless of your employment, whether you're in an employment relationship or not. So that means if you are legitimately self-employed, you still have the right to form an association. You still have the right to bargain collectively. And you can set rates, you can set terms and conditions, right? That can be done through collective bargaining, right? And that's kind of one of the expectations is we can start addressing some of these issues if workers, regardless of status, are able to associate and enter into enterprise or better sectoral collective agreements that set the rules, including on capping the percentage that they'll take off from payments. The whole reason why this text talks about remuneration or payment is also a nod to the fact that remuneration is for employees and payment is for workers who are not employees. So we're trying to, again, make sure that we're covering both. But as Saladin had pointed out, the language that's now in the Blue Report is weaker, and saying, okay, well, here's what we need to do for workers in an employment relationship. And if you're not in an employment relationship, well, government should try to basically do what we asked you to do in the previous section. But even then, I think, um, we just won a few years ago, a tripartite agreement around the issue of living wages, and we're talking here about adequate wages. We're talking about reasonable, where is it? Should be reasonably compensated for expenses, which doesn't make any sense. If you have expenses, you should be compensated for them, right? So, and this to extent possible and appropriate. Again, I understand why that is there, but I think we really need to be saying each member shall make sure that workers who are not employees are still receiving payment that is, equivalent to a living wage, right? And their costs are covered. So, again, I'm not going to go through article by article, but I mean, that's the idea here is to sweep up everyone under the concept of digital platform worker, and make sure that where we have rights or standards, protections, that where we need to, we could refer to here's what happens to employees, but those who are legitimately self-employed, that they should be extended an equivalent or protection, even though it may not be the same that would be under an employment relationship. We still want to see those same kind of rights and protections extended across the board, right? So again, some governments, again, and remember, we're trying to negotiate this for all sectors that are covered by digital labor platforms and all countries. So it complicates, it makes it very complicated. But I do think, with we could accomplish a lot more and build in some flexibility that doesn't deprive workers of their rights or protections, but where they're in legitimate self-employment, that we find a way to get equivalent coverage extended, even if it's not through national laws that are directed specifically to employees, right? And that'll be the way to make sure that everyone, regardless of their status, is afforded the same protections. That was the approach last year from the workers. That I think will remain the approach of the workers group this year. Again, it's going to be a lot more effort to try to get get those concepts back into the Blue Report, into the convention that's been presented to us. But that has always been our direction, and I think it will continue to be. But again, I'm hoping that many of you will be there again this year, and we can, in our workers group, hash out how we do this the best, most direct and effective way.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much. Over now, back to Pat. And Pat, you've had an enormous amount of experience in the past, being part of the processes that led up to conventions at the ILC, and some landmark ones at that. So how do you see this particular process in terms of the possibility of getting there? How does it compare to everything that you've seen in the past? And what's your expectations? Thank you so much. Over to you, Pat.
Okay, thank you, Biju. Yes, so I already mentioned that we wet our teeth on the ILO Convention on Homework, Convention 177, and it took us by surprise that we ended up with a convention which didn't include own account workers at all. They were completely excluded. That made us think, maybe we're in the wrong place. Maybe we should be looking for another institution. But after sort of trying, we realized that actually the ILO is unfortunately the only international multilateral organization which specifically protects and defends the rights of workers, even those in the informal economy and the new world of work. But the dilemma is that the very tripartite structure of the ILO itself militates against protecting and defending the equal rights of workers who are not in an employment relationship. So we've been trying ever since the 1990s to achieve a paradigm shift in what is basically the predominantly global north-dominated industrial framework of the ILO and its instruments, to try to catch up on the rights of workers in the informal economy and the changing world of work. And in 2002, there was a seminal discussion that resulted in a resolution on decent work in the informal economy. And there, a definition of own account workers was achieved. It was a big fight as well. It took a vote, something like that you wouldn't think you'd have to vote on, but we did. And we got a definition of own account workers, which means that it's now, cast in that stone which exists in the ILO. The problem is that after the passing of that resolution, we found that governments still struggle to actually implement equal rights for own account workers and all other workers. And Jeff mentioned some of the legal systems that have a problem. And in fact, legal systems are a big obstacle here, and it's an excuse that is used. And therefore, the terminology that's used in many of these instruments, according to national law and practice, is precisely where you get caught, because the national law and practice excludes those workers. So it's a really bad clause to have. We decided last year in the workers group to really not agree to that, but it's all over the place again in the blue paper, the Blue Report. So so we still faced, even though in the wording and in terms of what Jeff talks about, the very basic rights, the right to freedom of expression, freedom of association, collective bargaining, those exist in principle, but in fact, in practice, they don't. And this is what we've been facing in all the kinds of workers that we organize, where they basically mainly own account workers, or where some part of them are own account workers, like workers in many sectors of the informal economy. And of course, we're facing the same thing now with platform workers. Now, there's another thing which we've participated in at the ILO, which maybe passed under the radar, but we're starting to think we should maybe look at it again. It's the recurrent discussions on social dialogue and tripartism. Now, this started in 2013. It was then repeated in 2018. StreetNet International, where I was at the time, we sent somebody into that discussion because we felt that we'd been having such difficulty in genuine recognition of collective bargaining for own account workers that we thought, let's try to use this discussion, to get this recognized. And there's a wonderful clause in that resolution from 2018. It's clause 3A, which places an obligation on member states to develop innovative approaches, including initiatives to ensure the exercise of freedom of association and the effective recognition of the right to collective bargaining are extended to and respected in employment relationships where they have not traditionally been available, and to new and emerging forms of employment, and that those workers are able to enjoy the protection afforded to them under the applicable collective agreements. Unfortunately, it ends off with in accordance with applicable laws and national circumstances, which kind of kills it in a way. But this provision, unfortunately, though, it actually directly contradicts the really conservative definition of collective bargaining, which is strictly confined to employers and employees, in the outdated ILO Convention 154. Unfortunately, conventions are more senior in the ILO than resolutions, and therefore that outdated one is the one that everyone quotes. That's a problem that we need to address. I think there's probably a way of doing that. I think one could probably propose a discussion one year on collective bargaining to make amendments and updatements to ILO Convention 154, which I know has been done in other topics like child labor, etc. So the problem is that we're still sitting with this because of this contradiction which exists. And it is all because of the exact clauses of the ILO. But one of our things that we are thinking now this year is let's then maybe fight on two fronts in this ILC. The one is the Committee on Decent Work in the Platform Economy, and which we're all talking about. And the other one is the Committee on Recurrent Discussion on Social Dialogue and Tripartism, the third discussion of which is scheduled for this year. It's another one of the committees. It has its own tripartite committee. StreetNet International's long game is to continue the struggle for the rights of own account workers, and therefore StreetNet is planning to have some of their delegates or one of their delegates at that committee after the recurrent discussion in which they participated in 2018, trying to improve from that clause 3K that we got. So we think that maybe those platform workers who are at the ILC, we know that we'll have some platform workers at the ILC, although not as many as would like to be there. But those groups that go there should think of splitting themselves between the two committees and reporting to each other daily in the early mornings about their progress with regard to the rights of own account platform workers. And what this means, I've discovered that we don't know, we've got to double check who's the workers' chairperson for the Committee on the Recurrent Discussion. Jeff, maybe you can help us with that. I haven't checked up because I just thought of this too recently. And then starting to talk to that person as well. And then the document that's going to come out for that discussion is called Report 4, but it's not yet on the ILO website. Now, that one won't contain, because that's just going to be a resolution again, that won't contain a draft text because there's not a draft instrument. What it will contain is points of discussion for the 2026 discussion. And what we should do is wait for that report number 4, which contains those points of discussion, and in parallel start preparing for that discussion. Because overall, there is some sort of cross-fertilization between instruments, even though sometimes the more senior ones are, that have more status are the worst ones. But nevertheless, one can sometimes deal with that. And then develop a parallel strategy for fighting on this front as well. So I'd like to suggest to IAATW that you think into that, that you send some people to both of those committees, not only to the one on the platform economy. So that's my 2 cents of thinking that I've had about, apart from now the normal procedures that we do, we all need to start drafting amendments to the problematic clauses in the blue paper, as you know, that we've already started identifying, sharing that with all of our allies, identifying whatever good clauses there are in the draft text for us to agree to defend against being amended out in 2026 by the employers or governments. We mustn't drop that ball. As Jeff has said, we must also avoid too many amendments on lots of less important issues. You know, when you spend an afternoon arguing about a comma, we must do a bit less of that. Lobby all the trade unions and sympathetic governments, as we normally do. we need to do quite a few convenings between now and the end of May to compare our developing positions and to share intelligence gathering information that we are picking up. And if necessary, review our strategies, but try to find our common ground so that we can really identify that and then stick to it, really tightly. Lobby the governments of the Global South as a priority. I've also discovered that there's some difference between the platforms that are being used in Anglophone Africa and Francophone Africa. So we need to do some work in Africa to make sure that we maintain the African Union unity that we had in ILC 2025. Because after all, there are 54 countries in the AU, as the Nigerian government constantly reminded our chairperson last year, while there's about 28 countries in the EU who I think we're likely to be fighting with on the question of own account workers. So, we need to also make sure that we maintain the unity among those governments that were supporting us last year, because this year some of the issues may cause some of the governments to get a bit dislodged, and I'm a bit nervous about that in the case of Africa, having discovered that we're dealing with different platforms in those two blocks. So I think that's it from me for now. Yeah, Bijou, you were just about to ask me.
Thank you so much.
That's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Pat, for those suggestions, including double tracking, trying to pay attention to both those unfolding discussions within the ILC 2026. Now over to Ashwini for a quick last 4 to 5 minutes before we spend 15 minutes with Q&A. I know we'll go past time. Well, we'll get close to 2 hours, but hopefully we'll stick in there and at least get 15 or 20 minutes in Q&A. Over to Ashwini.
I'll keep my comments as tight as possible, like just given our issues of time, as well as the fact that I really find myself in pretty much echoing what Salahuddin, Pat, and Jeff have already said. So just a couple of things that I would want to emphasize, I think, with respect to the issue of as Jeff said, the centrality of the problem of misclassification and the lack of attention to it, and of the need to defend access to collective bargaining rights and the right to form and join unions. There are a few bad faith arguments that are being made by employers in the Blue Report that I think are relevant to both of those questions, and I think will be worth paying attention to. We see employers, as well as some governments, really just hammering on this idea that the ILO's mandate does not cover the regulation of technology or business arrangements or true civil or commercial contracts. And while those seem innocuous on their face, clearly those arguments are being made in a very disingenuous way. They argue that platform workers are by default independent contractors and not employees, and that they are independent contractors by choice. Across the employers group, we're seeing a deep refusal to address how workers' choices are shaped and constrained by corporate power. And we're just being asked to accept that workers would pick some vague idea of flexibility over, paid leave, Social Security, minimum wage guarantees, the right to form and join a union, when we know that they were never actually given that choice. So the employers group would like to enshrine and confirm an extremely limited role for the ILO. They want to insist on the most formalistic reading of the principle that the ILO can only engage and regulate those defined as employers, and the reality, which is that platforms are making every conceivable twist and turn to avoid being classified as employers is largely ignored or denied. So let me just jump to the bottom line then, because I think the stakes really are overwhelming for the ILO and not just for workers group within the ILO. If we can't get beyond that formalistic definition of the ILO's mandate and reach and understand that it's got to have a role in regulating corporate control over work, whether that's described as over employers, quasi-employers, however you define that category of corporate control, then I fear that enterprises are just poised to deliver a real blow to the relevance of the ILO. Okay.
Thank you so much, Ashwini. Thank you so much, Ashwini. And we are on to questions. And hopefully we can get at least 2 rounds of it. The way we felt that we should deal with questions is as many questions I've seen have arrived in chat already. And so I'm going to turn to Blake now to quickly read out, let's say, 2 or 3 of the most relevant questions, and then we can go back to each of the panelists for a minute each, and we can do that at least 2 rounds of that very quickly. So over to Blake.
Thanks, Biju. Yep, I will do as best I can on 2 at a time, if that's okay. The first question comes from Omar Parker from NEFSA. Given what we have seen in the Blue Report and how disappointed we are in it, what should we have for priorities? I'm sorry, this is a question from Mavis Kugse from Setuk. Given what we have seen in the Blue Report and how disappointing it is, what should our priorities be for the convention? And what should our strategy be for engaging the lobbying governments ahead of the ILC? So comments from the panelists on that would be welcome. And then the question from Omar Parker from NEFSA would be, the IAATW's recent report on subscription model, this new business approach to platform work, appears to get around some of the definitions, some of the issues that already we're disappointed in. So how do we see those, the convention being changed to address that new phenomena, the newer phenomena, switching to a subscription model?
Thank you. Thank you, Blake, for those 2 questions. Over to the panelists, and maybe we can start with, Jeff. I just got a text from Salahuddin saying he wants to comment about the subscription model. But sure, we'll come to you in a moment, Salahuddin. Maybe we can start with Jeff and then go to Pat, Ashwini, and then finally Salahuddin on this one.
Yeah, so on the priorities and strategy, I think that is something we obviously don't have a lot of time for, but it's something that we need to define. I know the I2C is going through a process now of kind of reaching out to its own members shortly with an analysis of the Blue Report, and I think some recommendations about where to focus our attention. I think there, we need to. I have little doubt that there will be a very large overlap of the concerns that I've heard on this call, and the concerns that I've already heard from the ITC, and will, I'm sure, hear more of. And then, yes, there's going to be a question about, of those, where are we going to focus our attention? And I don't know that I have an answer, because that's, I think, something where there still needs to be some discussion about, collectively as a movement, as to what those are going to be, and how we try to solve those problems.
Sounds good.
On the subscription, I'll give very quickly. I think there are a couple of ways which I think this is could be addressed. I mean, if you go back and look at the White Report, the report that set this off. I mean, the ILO is aware of the subscription model, and this is not something I think that was sprung on them unaware. I think on one hand, there is language now only in the recommendation, but we can also try to fight for in the convention around prohibiting the payment of fees. So that is one angle of attack. Another, and perhaps this is a conversation we have so we don't burn up all the time here on a separate conversation, is I've from my understanding of the subscription model and in reading the report, I mean, I still think there's a way in which you read the definition and it covers the subscription model. I understand the IAATW report does not, but I think maybe there would be some value in having a further discussion about it. But certainly, regardless, I think during the June conference, we would make very clear our understanding that the subscription model is in fact covered, and and if necessary, like find ways to make that crystal clear. But
Brilliant.
I mean, that would be my response.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And I think you're absolutely right about it. Between now and June, there's a lot of engagement that we all need to be doing with each other. And the IAATW remains absolutely committed to constantly opening up that space for engagement and brainstorming and coming up with ideas and trying to find a way to unify everybody as we move forward. Over to Pat.
So I think, yes, I've also been quickly scrolling through the questions in the chat. All really good questions. It would be good to have enough time, but during the course of the next few months, we'll hopefully touch on them. So I think, Mavis, on the issue about the lobbying of the governments, I think what's pretty important is that, what somebody on the chat has said about Kenya is similar to what we found in South Africa, which is that our government departments don't work together very well. And so you never quite, so in South Africa, our law that was passed was by the Transport Department, and it doesn't have a single decent work provision in it. And when the Department of Transport was challenged on that, they said, well, that's not our problem. That's the Labour Department's problem. Meantime, the government is supposed to be working together with all the government departments. So one of the things, that we're trying to do, as Mavis also knows, because we're talking to her about this, is to have a couple of dialogues. We're planning one in South Africa where we have trade unions from throughout the SADC region, which is where SATUK's members are from, because both maybe talking through some of the issues with our government authorities, the ones that are going to be there, as well as talking to the trade union representatives who, some of you on the chat have said the trade unions are yellow unions, they won't fight for your issues. Whether that's true or not, unfortunately, you need them to vote for you at the ILC. So irrespective of your own organization's relationship to unions, it is necessary to educate those unions so that they are more knowledgeable about these issues. So we have to do a lot of education, both of our formal sector trade unions who do go to the ILO, as well as our governments. And what it means sometimes is going into the different ministries of our governments who are responsible for this. So I would say that, and unfortunately, Omar, on the question of the subscriptions model, somebody's going to have a really creative dream one day, because I've been trying to apply my mind to this issue. And we're going to have to come up with something really creative, because I don't think there's been an instrument before where you had to try to predict what was going to happen in the future with quite, so little to go on as in the case of this particular one. And this one is where it's much more clear that apart from the subscriptions model, after we've dealt with that one, another one's going to pop up. So we have to look at something that can protect us against these future evasions. Let's all keep thinking on that one.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat. Over to Ashwini.
Again, in the unfortunate position of having it all be said before. But yes, I mean, just to sum up, the fight seems to be about dealing with a set of enterprises that are engaged in very deliberate shape-shifting to try to escape regulation, and that's not just facing the ILO, but with respect to national frameworks as well, and thinking about how we can be a whole lot more nimble than we have been to date, and recognize that the challenges to maximalist coverage of standards are not just that workers are at risk of being carved out, but also enterprises and types of commercial activity are at risk of being carved out wholesale. So that's an answer, I guess, both to Mavis and to Omar, that those I see as the main risks and the priorities.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ashwini. Over to Salahuddin. Salahuddin भाई, सवाल ये है कि ये जो नया सब्सक्रिप्शन मॉडल आया है, जो आप एकदम वाकिफ है उससे, क्योंकि हिंदुस्तान में सबसे ज्यादा फैला है वो, उसके बारे में आपकी क्या राय है? इसके ये सवाल है।
जी, ये एक बहुत अच्छा सवाल है। एक तरफ ILO में प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स के लिए कन्वेंशन बन रहा है और दूसरी तरफ बड़ी प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज अपना पूरा बिजनेस मॉडल बदल रही है। पूरे इंडिया में अब सब्सक्रिप्शन मॉडल चल रहा है, जिसमें कंपनीज ड्राइवर्स को पेनिंग कर रही है, बल्कि ड्राइवर्स ऐप पे काम करने के लिए कंपनीज को सब्सक्रिप्शन दे रहा है। साउथ एशिया के देशों में दुनिया के 35-40 माइनस प्लेटफॉर्म वर्कर्स काम करते हैं। अगर ये सब्सक्रिप्शन बिजनेस मॉडल अगर साउथ एशिया के देशों में सफल हो गया, तो शायद पूरी दुनिया में प्लेटफॉर्म कंपनीज इस बिजनेस मॉडल को चलाएंगे। क्या व्यू रिपोर्ट वाली ड्राफ्ट कन्वेंशन इस बात का कोई जिक्र है? बिल्कुल नहीं। तो ILO कन्वेंशन बन जाए पर इसका कोई मतलब नहीं होगा। सोचिए, क्या इस परिस्थिति में हम सबको मिलके बचा सकते हैं? शुक्रिया।
Thank you, Salahuddin bhai. Over to Akriti for a quick translation.
Yes, the subscription issue is a very important question. On one hand, a convention for platform workers is being drafted at the ILO. On the other hand, major platform companies are completely overhauling their business models. Across India, a subscription model is now gaining traction, one in which companies do not pay the drivers. Rather, the drivers pay a subscription fee to the company for the privilege of working on the app. Countries in South Asia are home to 35 to 40% of the world's platform workers. If this subscription-based business model proves successful in South Asia, platform companies worldwide may very well adopt this. Is there any mention of this scenario in the draft convention outlined in the Blue Report? Absolutely not. Consequently, while the ILO convention may indeed be established, it will ultimately be rendered meaningless. Consider this. Can we, working together, avoid this situation? Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Akriti. And I must just quickly add here on the subscription model that I don't know whether people have noticed, but just last week, just as the IAATW report on the subscription model came out, and that can be accessed at IAATW.org under publications, Just as that report came out, I think that the same day or the next day, there's a report in Bloomberg that said that Uber is moving forward with hiring for a product manager or using the subscription model. So clearly, Uber, and it's at a global level. So clearly, Uber is thinking along those lines for sure. And in New York itself, where I am based out of, we've had a situation wherein there's been reports of a company that is using the subscription model, but has started out and is not even being cleared by the city's Taxi and Limousine Commission to operate in the industry. And this company suddenly showed up at a city council hearing last week and defended its position and its right to operate in New York using the subscription model. So clearly, this is moving. This is moving across the world, and we need to be thinking seriously about it as we shape up for ILC 2026 and try and build a unified solution around it. Back to Blake for the second round of questions, which will probably be the last round unless we see that there are burning issues that are coming back immediately.
Thanks, Biju. I think we'll get time for maybe one more question.
Excellent.
And that's from Naftali Wambalu from Africa Tech Workers Union, who raises the question, the definition of independent contractors being flawed, as is the big platform enterprises. In many countries, we only have definitions for traditional employees and employers and contractors. But even by those definitions, the current Blue Report has taken complete disregard for the circumstances and arrangement of the current platform work. Is there any way that we as workers can harmonize what we think should be the rightful definitions and collectively lobby our governments to adopt those, not just in the Blue Report, but also in the ratifying legislation?
Excellent. Do you want to add another question, Blake, or is that the question you want to throw out for the
Well,
panelists?
considering time, I think it's best to just let's probably just end there.
Excellent. Over to, maybe we'll start with Ashwini this time and go backwards with Pat, Jeff, and Salahuddin, who is actually at an airport and is trying to catch a flight. Over to Ashwini.
I mean, maybe that's a call for action to the folks on this call. It seems like the need to set clear priorities as we're leading up to an ILC where there's going to be very little time and a lot of stuff on the agenda of this committee. If we can really just make find ways to drill down on that issue between now and the ILC and agree across our organizations that really is the fight of our lives. Maybe we have a chance of prevailing around this around the language and the standard.
Ashwini, over to Pat.
Sorry.
Pat, do you want to come in?
Yes. I just want to answer in response to this, and this is somebody I was in a discussion with this afternoon because we had a meeting with the ATWM. So I'm very glad to see you here again. I think one of the difficulties on trying to get new definitions is that it's one of the most elusive things possible. And, we learned this in all of the negotiations that we had about workers in the informal economy. When in 2002, when we had the decent work in the informal economy, again in 2014 and 2015, when we were negotiating about Recommendation 204, about the formalization of the informal economy, particularly because we had to find a way to recognize workers in the workers with an employment relationship as well as workers who don't have an employment relationship. And I have to say that's one of the things we haven't cracked yet. So what we've been looking at in WeGo is since we made some progress on the issue of own account workers, because own account workers is basically a worker for whom you cannot find a relationship of employment, even a quasi-employment relationship, which often exists if you have something like disguised employment and so on. So I don't know, given that we've been on so many rounds of trying to have these definitions, it may be a wild goose chase to try to do it that way, to try to get a new definition. Given that we have made some progress in getting the concept of own account workers, which can cover nearly all of these other categories that are called independent contractors and all these other types of names, they would all fall under own account workers. I think it's worthwhile considering putting everything we've got in to try to ensure that, because there's some acceptance of that concept, that we work very hard on getting the rights of those kinds of workers, own account workers, in other words, to be properly recognized and to be further explained in future instruments, instead of always skirting around that category, which is what happened in recommendation 204. Actually, we skirted around that, and there was some vagueness as to whether own account workers were actually workers or economic units. It wasn't very satisfactory, to be honest. So I think we need to really stick to that. So I know that's not what you were hoping for from ATWM, but this is my own view after the attempts that we've made to get new things. It's really hard to get new things in an institution like the ILO. It's usually easier to get something that there's some basis for already. So wherever there is that, one needs to try and go for that. Doesn't mean we mustn't try for the new things, because we do have to try for some new things actually in this convention.
No, absolutely, Pat. And I think what the person who just posed that question is also asking is whether we can do some preparatory work early to even assess that possibility of managing to push something new. But I know that you've been advocating for this own account worker inclusion within the structure of the platform standards discussion all through the last ILC. And so I think we need to bring that into the engagement between now and the ILC for sure. Over to Jeff for a quick minute.
I'll be quick. Like, I think it is honestly going to be difficult on the definition, given that that was one of the very few issues that we were actually able to close last June. There's going to be, I think, even though the ILO and the Brown report suggested, well, maybe we could reopen it because there was some question as to whether this organizes and or facilitates was good language. Should we reopen it? I just have some doubts about being able to do that. So I think we're going to need to think of other ways in which in the text to accomplish what we need to do without doing it definitionally.
Okay.
But not rule it out, but I'm just saying it's going to be governments are going to be really, I think, uninterested in given how much work we have to do to reopen what's already been done.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeff. I think, especially given that the question came from the representative of the African Tech Workers Union, I think there's also how it connects back to the question of creating all of the African Union as a kind of a basis for the governments from there, from Africa, unified, creating a position. Let's see if any of those become possible as we move forward. Blake, are you sure you don't have any other questions to ask?
We could ask one more, sure. We had John Mark Wanika from FESTUCC. Comrade, it's directed at Pat, but maybe all the others can also have some comments on a second question. Comrade Pat, John asks, as we know, the ILO process is led by governments, employers, and unions. but the informal workers are often not directly recognized within this structure. How did WeGo work around this during the recommendation 204, for example? And then for the rest of the panelists, there was a question on the platform economy and network effects. The customers are often part of this new subscription model. Sometimes they're part of the equation in ways that disrupts the standards we're trying to enact. How should we even think about these roles? I think that's a pretty hard extension, maybe, but let's ask anyway.
All right. Thank you so much, Blake. Over to Pat to start that, and good to know that John's out there listening. A big wave out to you, John. Wonderful to hear from you. Over to Pat.
Yeah, he disappeared into the FES now. Mark, yeah, thanks for this question. Basically, what we've been doing in the network, which works together with WeGo, which is StreetNet, HomeNet, International Alliance of Waste Pickers, is we've managed to actually get accredited as our own organizations, which I know is the advice I gave to IAATW last year as well. Once we have international structures to represent workers, then we come into the ILC. We're not able, our members get registered as NGOs, the same as all the international trade union federations do. But we make our inputs in the workers group because all workers, including those that have a T badge, can't talk in the workers group. It's the chairperson of the workers group that talks. But what's really important about coming in either with an NGO registration, if your organization, you can either get another organization to accredit you, or you can be accredited. So that's how we got as many people from those sectors into the room for the ICC and the ILC. And this is what we did in 2014 and 2015. It's the first time that we had quite a big group that came from street vendors, StreetNet, HomeNet, as well as the IDWF. We also had our first few waste pickers because they didn't have the International Alliance yet. But we do get them to come there, not in large numbers, obviously. And then we introduce them into the workers group. And the workers group has acknowledged organized workers from these kinds of organizations. And the same applied last year with platform workers, where people like our today's moderator and a couple of others were also in the room. We had quite a few platform workers in the room with us. And the main issue then is to ensure, because we know the place we can make our inputs is the workers group. And our job then is to convince the other trade unionists who are there, those who are maybe skeptical, those who don't understand our sectors very well. We have to do a lot of work there. So we have to do a lot of work convincing even everyone in the workers group. But I think compared to the hostile response we got in 1995 on the Homework Convention, I have to say we've moved really far. We have much better relationships with the teams that run the workers groups now, people like Jeff, Monica, etc. And so it is worth where we can get a few people in, sending people from these sectors, put them under the they can go under the ITUC, they can go under one of the global union federations, they can go under other organizations like ours. There are ways of getting in there, and then come there very strategically, ready to make your inputs in the workers group. Because elsewhere you observe like all the other workers do, and if you're disappointed because you can't put your hand up and be recognized by the chair, it doesn't work like that. And so we train workers in these sectors how to operate in that context. And we've now got some pretty well-trained workers in the informal economy who really understand how the ILC works. And I think we're heading in that direction as well with platform workers. Watch the space.
Thanks, Pat. Sage advice. Over to Jeff, and then to Ashwini, and then Salahuddin to close us out. Over to Jeff.
I don't have much more, and actually I do have to go. It's 4:30.
I know.
So thank you very much, and let's just keep the conversation going and figure out how we get from here to there. I don't have much more to add now at this point.
Thank you so much, Jeff. All the best. And we will, of course, we stay committed to continuing the engagement. Over to Ashwini.
Just a quick point then. I do think the question of customers is going to be central, especially as we're seeing the expansion of the subscription model. And here's where I think we need to look at, in a very ample way, at some of the experiments that trade unions have tried to drive to try to bring customers into the framework of industrial relations in one way or another. I mean, I'm thinking in particular of healthcare aides in the US who may be funded by government social security, but their employer, at least on paper, is, the individual with a disability, the individual who's, using old age benefits to employ them. And without some kind of innovation to enable collective bargaining, you would never be able to secure any kind of change in standards. And so what trade unions had pushed for was they'd pressured individual states to create a quasi-employer at the level of the state with whom bargaining would take place. And that was in many ways quite effective. And I know that the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, Biju, has used regulation to think about how to create a bargaining framework, even where the money flows primarily from customers to drivers and does not necessarily always flow through a quote unquote employer. So thinking about some of those things and thinking about the need for us to perhaps go back to the to basics.
Thanks, Ashwini. Over to Salahuddin bhai. अगर आखिर में कुछ कहना है तो 30 सेकंड 1 मिनट जो भी आपका कहना है वो आगे की प्रोसेस के लिए उसके बारे में जो कहना है कह दीजिएगा और मैं ट्रांसलेट कर दूंगा आपको और क्योंकि मेरे भी फाइनल कमेंट्स है
जी थैंक यू सो मच सभी साथियों को और आगे की रणनीति बनाने के लिए हम सबको इकट्ठा होकर इसकी चीज़ को सोचने की सख्त ज़रूरत है क्योंकि नेक्स्ट ILC होने वाला है तो उसकी तैयारी भी हमें करना पड़ेगा किस तरीके से हम सारे इंडिपेंडेंट ट्रेड यूनियंस और ट्रेड यूनियंस और जो दूसरे साथियों को भी हम मिला के अपनी आवाज़ को बुलंद कर पाते और रख सकते और हमारी हक की आवाज़ जो है ज़रूर वहाँ तक पहुँचना और उसके अंदर हम किसी भी तरीके से पहुँचने की जिम्मेदारी है और पहुँचने के लिए सारे रास्ते अपनाने की ज़रूरत है उम्मीद करता हूँ कि आप सब भी इस चीज़ के ऊपर काम करें और आगे ये सभी के बीच में लेके जाए अपने अपने कंट्रीज के अंदर अपने अपने बातचीत करें इस चीज़ के ऊपर चाहे गवर्नमेंट से हो चाहे दूसरे नेशनल ट्रेड यूनियन से हो सेंट्रल ट्रेड यूनियन से हो इसके ऊपर बातचीत करना हम सबको ज़रूरत है आज की तारीख थैंक यू
Thank you so much, Salahuddin. Salahuddin there is just underscoring, I'm going to just paraphrase him, underscoring the need for a unified Raniti strategy. He is explicitly talking about the need to build a unified strategy and he's reaching out to the entire audience to say you're in different countries. We need to figure out using the unified strategy to reach out to your governments, your central trade unions in your country, so that we come into ILC 2026 with a framework that is unified. Thank you so much, Salahuddin. And I will just close us out with 3 very specific comments. The first is there has been a consistent call through this entire 2 hours that we need to work together. We need to build a unified approach and continue our engagement. And so IAATW stands committed and we'll continue to create several opportunities between now and ILC 2026 for that engagement, We remain committed to a unified strategy moving forward. So that's the first. Now, commenting on the question, and I want to thank Akriti for her translation, Siddhant for all the back-end work they've done, the panelists, and all of the folks who joined us. I'm just so delighted with the kind of participation we've seen, especially from the Global South, and I think we need to carry this forward. I'll just make one final comment on the question of customers and payments. So there's all sorts of complications coming in. One of the things that we have not yet acknowledged is that alongside the subscription model, there's also been a new bidding model that's coming up, wherein the platform tosses a number out at the customer and asks the customer to bid above it or below it, etc. So the customer, in a certain sense, enters into the practice of creating the fare itself. So that's one. And when Ashwini referred to New York, the subscription model has been something that we've dealt with on the yellow taxi side for the longest time. There's something called the lease cab, something called the lease, where a driver walks into a fleet garage, drops, let's say, $120 down on the table, and that's his lease fees, and then pulls the car out and then drives for the next 12 hours. He or she could turn the corner, switch off the ignition, and go to sleep. The boss has already gotten $120 of lease fee, right? So what we did in response to that is we created a concept of a lease cap, which would hold that number down, which is the money that the driver has to pay into the platform, right? Into the company. So those are all approaches that are there and that have already been tested, tried. Rulemaking has been done around it. And so once there is a precedent of rulemaking in any national, state, or municipal framework, I think those things can be brought into an ILC convention/recommendations framework fairly easily. We need to look at the best practices from around the world and build this engagement. So IAATW remains deeply committed to that engagement. We'll continue to engage. We'll continue to create opportunities for all of us to engage together all the way between now and into ILC 2026 and beyond. Thank you so much for joining us. We will be back in touch with all of you. Everyone who registered for this Zoom will be back in touch with links to the recording, etc., for those who missed it. And for those who want to review it again, you'll have a recording link, etc., very soon. And any further developments, we'll keep you posted. Thank you so much. Signing out now.
Thank you so much, leader. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much, brother. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Let's keep in touch.
Thank you. Bye.
The struggle continues.